Welcome to All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
And this is one of our favorite revisits. It's a new episode, a new outlook on polar bears. We did do an update a couple years ago, and this was one of the first species. You remember what episode we did in this one?
I'm going to guess lucky number 8.
It was, episode 9 is what I had.
Okay. Close. Or 6, 7. 6 or 7.
I think it was
that one. That's
office.
A shout out to my boys right now, for the record.
Yeah. But it was in my house in Florida, early days of the podcast. We did polar bears early on.
Yeah, we were sitting next to each other, which is hilarious, right?
Yeah, in my office before I made the jump to New Zealand. But so much has changed in 8 years. Like our understanding of where they are. When we recovered them a few years ago, we talked about, the ice, the polar ice. Now we have data on how that's impacting populations. So we're going to bring a lot of new information and revisit some of the old. And then also we could put this on YouTube, which is a big push for us in the coming years. So polar bear, Angie.
I mean, it's the largest land carnivore. It's the largest bear species. It's one of the most iconic animals on Earth. It's been captivating people worldwide as a powerful, charismatic hunter of the Arctic ice. And there's been so many shows that have followed them, and they're just an incredibly well-adapted hunter that lives in this harsh, cold terrain. And we're going to talk a lot about the sea ice, where they spend a fair portion of their life, which makes them functionally marine mammals because they depend on this frozen platform, which is really cool. And the sea ice and how it melts and then builds back up is important to every stage of a polar bear's life. They travel on it, they hunt seals on it, they find mates. Some regions they use it to den. So the ice-free period has been extending and being problematic for the last 20 or 30 years of climate change. So we're definitely going to touch on that. And the IUCN does currently list the polar bear as vulnerable to extinction, with the greatest threats being, like I said, climate change and this ice loss. So some populations, Chris will dive into, are declining. Some are staying stable, and there's a little good news. A few populations, I think, are slowly increasing. So their conservation status does vary region to region, but they're just an incredible animal. So they're super swimmers, super smellers. We're going to talk about if their fur is really white or not, which is so many fun facts. And we'll touch on what's happening with the sea ice and are they able to adapt to this, and give you some of the updated data on that.
Yeah, because when we first covered them, it was, we lose the sea ice, that's it. The polar bears are done. That's kind of our thinking when we first presented this animal 8 years ago. But now that's become more nuanced and it's more regional. So in some regions the population is declining because of the lack of sea ice, where other regions they're adapting. So how well is the polar bear adapting, I think, is the big question today. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges of that, because it is tough. It is tough. And just to kick it off again, I think it's always worth revisiting sizes. As Angie said in the beginning, the polar bear is the largest land carnivore that we have. We've covered plenty of bears. We did the Gobi bear a few months ago, and polar bears, just on average, just to give you the quick facts for Angie, can go into her description a little bit, which I think most people watching know what a polar bear looks like, but can stand upwards of 10 feet tall, almost 5.5 feet at the shoulder. So that's 3 meters tall, or 1.6 meters at the shoulder, and weigh upwards of 1,500 pounds or 700 kilograms. So that's
more than
the
Romeo.
Averages. Yeah, they're big.
They're
huge.
Yeah,
they're bigger than a horse. Yeah, they're massive. And the Kodiak brown bear is pretty similar in size to a polar bear, but polar bears are generally on average heavier, just a little bit heavier than, say, the largest brown bears in the world.
Yeah. And I think everybody knows what they look like for the most part, but just some distinguishing physical features of the polar bear is that it is large and stocky, as Chris mentioned. It's similar to that of a brown bear in shape, except that it lacks that shoulder hump. And the polar bear's head is relatively smaller than the other bears, and the neck is more elongated. And so, other than that, their hair is white in appearance. It can be a yellowish color in the summer, or even almost appear brown or gray, depending on the light and the conditions and if they're dirty or not. The polar bear skin is black. And the fur we'll talk about, it's technically not white, it's clear. So that's one answer to the opening question. But the fur is lacking in pigment, so I'll touch more on that when we get to Arctic adaptations. Other than that, they have huge paws and excellent paddles when they're swimming. And when you look at their feet, both the hind and the forefeet are furred, which acts for extra insulation when they're tracking across the snow and ice. And they, of course, they have cute little ears and a cute little tail, a little button tail. So
Yeah. No, they're one of the most iconic bear species, and that's why, around the winter, uh, up in the northern hemisphere, because it's summer here
mhm,
in New Zealand, but where you're at, I mean, you see polar bear stuff everywhere in the winter holidays, and
mhm.
they're so beloved. Now, they live in the Arctic, and the 5 countries is Canada, where up to almost 65% of all of them live, the United States and Alaska, Russia, Greenland, and then islands off Norway. But generally, like Angie said, they do come to the coastal regions, and that's happening a lot more now today. That's kind of what we're going to dive into, talking about the challenges with them. But generally, they're meant to live on the pack ice,
Yes.
and yeah, that's where they're supposed to be, so they can hunt the seals, get all of the energy they need and that thick blubber to survive the periods of year where there isn't the sea ice.
And I think it's important to point out too that during the summer months, bears can remain on these islands or coastlines with landfast ice or drift flow on ice, or get stranded sometimes on land where then they're forced to endure the warmer weather. So once again, we'll touch on that, but yeah, they pretty much have this awesome circumpolar distribution, and yeah, we think of them around Christmas time because they're near the North Pole.
Mhm. Now, what's interesting is the conservation efforts and the scientists are looking at regional populations. So
Hmm.
that's, I think, what a lot has changed is looking at, subpopulation to subpopulation. Now, there is just one species of polar bear, but
Correct. Yeah.
we, but we know that they are regionally distinct. So one of the facts of their range is they live in the southern Hudson Bay.
Hmm.
So not too far north. I don't know how many thousands of miles, or maybe 1,000 miles from where you grew up in Michigan. We're not going to see polar bears in the lower 48 states of the U.S., but southern Hudson Bay has a population of around 1,000 polar bears. And then as you go further north in Canada, you have larger regions of the Fox Basin, 2,200, Baffle Bay, 1,600, Davy Strait, 2,100. Then let's just go over to Alaska, the Chukchi Sea between Alaska and Russia. There's a population of over 2,000. Now, our data on the Arctic cap, we don't have a population, and parts of Russia, we don't have populations for. But the ones off Norway in the Barents Sea, off the islands, there's around 3,000. So uh, there's 19 separate regions that they're looking at. Those are just some of the highlights around the Arctic. And when we look at population trends, uh, like Angie said, some of the good news is parts of that northern parts of Canada, they are increasing. Some are stable. So the ones off Alaska, Russia are stable. The ones off Norway are stable or growing a little bit. But again, most of the polar bears are living in Canada. So the Davy Strait, which is between Greenland and Canada, that population's decreasing. And then the western Hudson Bay population is decreasing.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's complex. It's a
Yeah,
lot
it
more
really
complex than
is.
when we first covered them. Our understanding, plus you and I have 8 years now of doing this, where we've talked to so many experts around the world. We've covered so many species on every continent and all the oceans, and you and I have kind of a deeper understanding of the complexities of animal conservation, where I think 8 years ago it was like save the sea ice to save the polar bear. Now we realize, nah, it's going to be a lot more difficult than that, and it is a lot more nuanced with that.
Yeah, and there is at least one population at this point in 2025 that is known to be increasing, and that's in Canada, known as the McClintock Channel. So that's hopeful. And once again, it is important to note too that there's several regions around the Arctic Basin and in Russia and East Greenland, and even in northwestern Canada, where it's just data deficient at this point.
Yeah. Well, and one of the in doing my research, I was like, okay, what's weather trends up there? Because I know when we covered moose way back when, uh, it was way up there, I think in Yellowknife, where it was like 100 degrees Fahrenheit for a few days in July, which we covered moose many years ago. One of the most incredible facts about them was they can't sweat. Moose don't sweat to cool
Right.
down. And they actually have to be in an environment where it never gets above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Or if it does, on those hot days, they go and you'll see moose in rivers and streams and pools bathing themselves to cool off because they don't have the mechanisms to stay cool. So when you see days like that, 100 degrees in Yellowknife, which is really far north Canada, that was, yeah, concerning. And now they're seeing days where one of the hottest days of the year, I have the data here in a minute, where it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic Circle, which is unheard of. It shouldn't be that hot up there.
No. And I mean,
Yeah.
and the other thing too, I have like two slides all about all the cold adaptations that the polar bears have to live in this freezing weather. And it still is really important because of course they do spend a lot of time swimming in cold water or on ice and in snow. But in the same instance, yeah, they're not going to do well in warmer weather because they've adapted for hundreds of thousands of years to be in cold weather. And when looking at the Beaufort Sea population of polar bears, which is pretty well studied, data starting back in 1985 showed that basically very few polar bears spent a lot of time onshore in the summer along the southern Beaufort Sea. And now, up to 2020, up to 45% of these polar bears are hanging out uh, onshore along the southern Beaufort Sea. And then when they look at days spent onshore in the summer along the southern Beaufort Sea, it used to be in 1985, it was a couple days, 10 days, maybe something like that. And now fast forward to 2020 and on average 60 days or so. And we'll
Hmm.
talk about their food sources and their energetics here shortly, but
Hmm.
this impacts all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we've covered a lot on the Arctic Circle, the Arctic pack ice retreating and its critical importance. I think one that still sticks with me is the gray whale. Why that sea ice is so important, that grows the, I think, bivalves or the organisms in the
Yeah.
silt that they eat. And now that sea ice has retreated, those organisms, arthropods and things in the silt, no longer are growing
Yeah.
because the
Right.
ecosystem has changed. And so the gray whales are coming, scooping up the silt, coming up to feed and filtering it out, and there's no food. And that's why they're finding them emaciated or dead off the coasts of California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia as they migrate to Mexico.
Yeah.
So the sea ice is shrinking, and we know that. We've covered it. And here I found the data. It was in 2020 that the in the Arctic Circle, the hottest day was 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius in Yansk, Russia. And
Crazy.
that's still the hottest day measured, but on average, this past year, it was the warmest year on record for the Arctic Circle. So that is shrinking the polar ice cap. And in the last 8 years that we've covered this podcast, uh, the sea ice has decreased about 13% per year. So it's getting shorter and shorter. The the issue isn't so much just the size of the ice cap. A lot of this is older, thicker ice that's disappearing. And in the winter, it does refreeze, but it's much thinner. And it can't support the weight of polar bears or walrus or some of these other species that depend on it. And so, like Angie said, that's having a huge impact. And then with these ice-free seasons getting longer and longer, how does the polar bear survive? And it's not just survival, because they are surviving right now. I would say
Sure.
as a whole, the species is
Considering,
decreasing slowly, but
Mhm.
not rapidly.
Yeah, and right now the most widely cited scientific literature estimates that there are about 26,000 polar bears worldwide with a 95% confidence interval. So that's why they're listed as vulnerable worldwide and not endangered.
Well, and the impacts, I think the concern
Hmm.
is, even though these bears are surviving, they're having less time to hunt for seals.
Right.
So they are thinner.
Hmm.
Uh, so the seal population, how does it impact them? We'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But they're getting thinner, and then it's having impacts on cub survival. That's the concern. So mama, she's out there hunting while she's pregnant, getting fat, getting ready to have her cubs, and then she needs to produce milk to
Hmm.
feed that cub.
Hmm.
And when you're emaciated or thin, either mom won't carry the cub to term, or she doesn't produce enough milk and the cub starves. Those are the concerns today.
Yes.
That's the nuance that we're talking about. And some of the other impacts we're seeing is, like Angie said, they're spending more time on land, and sure, they'll go and eat bird eggs.
Sure.
You sent me a video this
They
morning of one chasing down a caribou right in the
Yes,
water.
yes, first time on
Yeah.
video. They thought that maybe that
Um,
was something they would do, but yeah, and we have a special guest coming up shortly that's going to talk about polar bear intelligence. But yeah, they're a carnivore and they're a hunter and they're brilliant. So they are going to be able to forage and find other food on land. But the data is really interesting that we have so far is this food that when they're spending more time on land and off the ice and not hunting the seals, the food that they're finding or hunting down is not enough energetically to sustain them for the year or for reproduction, as Chris pointed out. So there was a recent study published in 2024 in Nature Communications that tracked 20 Western Hudson Bay bears on land for about 3 weeks and found that 19 of the 20 bears they tracked lost about 0.4 to 1.7 kilograms per day, and that this terrestrial foraging, like Chris said, maybe they're doing eggs, caribou, whatever, scavenging for leftovers. Terrestrial foraging rarely extended basically their predicted time to starvation, basically reinforcing what they thought, sorry, which reinforces that most bears that are on land are basically effectively fasting when you look at it
uh,
from an energy
yeah.
expenditure and energy storage. So they can't, even though they're looking for food and finding it, they can't fully compensate for the lost access of this energy dense seal meat and blubber. So it's very problematic when you look at long-term effects for survival rates, not only for adults, but as Chris mentioned, for cubs. So that's what we need to keep our eye on, and that's and luckily, I mean, us there are researchers, of course, especially in this Hudson Bay area, that are able to study these polar bears and learn more about them. But it is concerning because they can change their behavior and some of their strategies, but from an energetics point of view, will it matter long term?
Yeah, literally, if you would ask me 8 years ago if polar bears could have just been on the edges of the Arctic and hunt and survive, as long as they could get enough food, caribou and whatnot, I would have told you sure. I think
Sure.
so.
Hmm.
Now we know no, they probably can't survive that. They can't survive on caribou and lemmings because their energetic requirements, as Angie's saying, calories. We need about 2,000, 2,500 calories a day, right? It's kilocalories, but let's just say calories, right? So we need, 2,500 calories a day to kind of sustain our lives as we move and expend energy, exercise, walk places, get up and down, our brains, thinking, all of that takes energy. So about 2,500 calories a day. A polar bear needs about 12,000 calories a day. And they can't get that from catching a caribou. Even though that's a lot of meat and protein, that isn't energy dense or fat like a ring seal.
No. Yeah.
On average, they need about one ring seal a day to survive. And that's because they're eating a lot of blubber and they're getting in that fat is a lot of energy that polar bears have evolved for, 500,000 years ago. But it took thousands of years for that brown bear to turn into a polar bear to utilize what it was catching and eating, which is ring seals and other types of seals. So sure, on land, they can eat so they don't starve. I calculated it out. It would need about 74 snow geese a day, or what was the lemmings? 270 lemmings per day to reach the same calories as one ring seal. And that's probably not even enough because they're probably taking more energy to try to catch all those things.
Right. And so, yeah,
And
and historically, part of a lot of populations of polar bears, not all, but a lot of them have this traditional, it's called like a walking hibernation or a walking dormancy. So it's not a true hibernation like we see in some of our other bear species, but basically a polar bear will instead undergo this state of light hibernation to reduce their activity and their metabolic rate and conserve energy when food is scarce and when they need to fast. So typically they'll do this in the summer or early fall when the sea ice is minimal and just the land hunting isn't great. So they do that, but because they're staying on land longer, and then when they do get out to sea, sometimes the hunting isn't as good because the sea isn't as thick, or they can't go to the traditional hunting grounds and things like this. Just overall, their calories are lower, and I think it'll be interesting to see the data as it moves forward. If they are on land, should they be more on this walking slash? Uh, Should they be more on this walking hibernation or dormancy or hunting, right?
mm-hmm,
Should they be doing
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
nothing to
Yeah.
save the calories or trying to get the geese or whatever? And probably different populations or subpopulations will do different strategies, and I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah. Well, I think the scientific consensus is polar bears are behaviorally flexible, but physiologically they're specialized because we're seeing, like you showed me that video today, the bear swimming out, catching the caribou, which is insane. They are eating eggs and snow geese and lemmings and other things to survive or stay, push back starvation. But that doesn't change the fact that they still need a high fat diet, that their reproduction is fixed. We can't really change that quickly. And just their baseline energy demands, their physiology. So, yeah, it's what we're seeing, what scientists think is our best case scenario is global warming is going to be limited to like a 2 degrees Celsius increase around the world. The sea ice will decline, keep declining, but doesn't completely disappear. We're only about 10 years away from the Arctic being completely ice free in the summer. So that's probably coming in the next 10 years, where you could sail right over the Arctic Circle, where, since humans have been around, that you weren't able to do that. Uh, but the outlook for polar bears is in some regions they'll do okay, some regions they're going to slip away. So we'll still have some core populations, but we're still seeing this shift. Worst case scenario, which hopefully none of us want, and that's if we don't implement anything, which, uh, gosh, I wish in an episode, 2025 has been a good year for conservation. There's been a lot of movement. They've come together. They're protecting 30% of the oceans. That has been an agreed. We talked about that early in the year with Ocean with David Attenborough. The conference down in Brazil. Brazil's still tightening up a little bit on their deforestation, but there's a big push there to slow it down, and it has slowed down. So there is movement around the planet. People aren't just sitting on their hands like, say, 10 years ago. And now it's like, okay, no, we have to do something. So worst case scenario, let's say nothing changes, which I believe change is happening, but let's say nothing happens. Global temperatures get up to 4 degrees Celsius on average. The Arctic is completely ice free all the time in the summer. A little bit of ice in the winter, but doesn't support polar bears. You're going to see these populations collapse. I think the southern populations, it will be too hot for them. They won't survive. And you're probably going to see the polar bears, decreasing, limited populations like we see, say, in the Javan rhino, down to 50 to 100 that are eking by, in certain parts of the world. And you're going to see a species that's critically endangered, and the outlook is not good. Maybe they're just under human care, and that's it. And we have them in places where we can keep them cold enough, meet their energy demands.
Yeah.
And polar bears are confined, which would be awful.
We
But
don't want
that's
that. Yeah.
that's
And
worst
they,
case. That's
and they are,
yeah.
and they are, I believe, we can ask John, but they are typically not super easy to breed under human care. So,
Yeah. No.
it happens, but
Yeah.
it's not easy. So, but you definitely touched on, of course, I think, why care about polar bears. They're just such these keystone species that their entire ecosystem balance depends heavily on their presence. And with them in decline, like Chris mentioned with the gray whale and the bivalves and all of that, they are an Arctic predator, but what are the seals eating, and what if there are too many seals, and what's happening in the ocean because of the lack of polar bear presence, and of course the lack of the sea ice. So we need to pay attention to them for that, and they do act as an indicator, of course, of overall Arctic ecosystem health, right? So we can visually see the bears are bigger, easier to count. People love them. I mean, you can do ecotourism with them up in the Hudson Bay area. It's definitely on my bucket list, where you go on the snow and ice buggy. One of my colleagues at the zoo did that, has done it like twice, and raves about it. It goes with like Polar Bear International and things like this. So people just love them, but they're easy to see. And what we don't see for all the other species, I'm talking even plant species that are, underneath in some of the coastal regions, but then also all the marine species. What is happening there that we don't see, or in theory don't care as much about? So they're really important. And we of course we're talking about polar bears, but there's also the Arctic foxes and other really just the Arctic hare and other really caribou, as Chris mentioned, other very classic Arctic creatures that are all intertwined in the polar bear's food web.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and just to leave this segment on good news, I did find the article. It was the BBC. This just came out a couple days ago that I read, and it was the 7 quiet wins for climate and nature in 2025, and
Well, let's
the
make them
renewable.
louder.
Yeah. So this is where I want to leave people with hope. Surging renewables. China is pushing and leading the world in renewable energy. So they're actually, I think it was they're actually decreasing their carbon emissions now, are in decline. So that's big because China's a huge, massive
Huge.
economy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's big. Ocean protection, I just mentioned, was ratified in September of 2025. The High Seas Treaty. So 30% of the oceans will be marine protected areas. So enough countries signed on. So that's enforceable now. Watched Ocean with David Attenborough earlier in the year. Interview director Toby Nolan talked about in that film when they showed those areas off Hawaii, off California, off New Guinea, that the ocean comes back very, very quickly. So that's a huge win. That's a massive win for us. Forest turnaround. So the COP30 that was hosted by Brazil, that they're a roadmap to implement a previous commitment to end deforestation by 2030, supported by more than 90 countries. So we're
That's
fighting
right.
hard to save the
2030 is
Amazon.
right around the corner.
Yeah, it's coming quick. Yeah, 5 years. The International Court of Justice, now countries can sue each other for climate change. So
It's the American way.
everybody sue America for its pollution. I'm suing Angie. I'm suing now. And then wins for wildlife. We talked about this a few months ago. Green sea turtles, huge win for that. Other species, and then protections for indigenous peoples. And this one I loved, the Klamath River in California. I lived on there with my dad in the summers. We dredged gold there. We can't do it anymore legally, so that wasn't very good for the river back in my youth. But 4 dams have been taken down, so the salmon are respawning in historical numbers. So there's a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. Polar bears, right now it's a choice. It's not too late for them. We know what's going to happen. We know what's happening. It's a choice that humanity can make to slow this down. We still have a long way to go when it comes to the changing climate and the use of renewable energy. And then, we've got to listen to the youth, the green generation. I have so much hope for them.
Yes.
But us old fuddy-duddies, because Angie and I are getting there, where we're going to be.
Speak for yourself. I am such a zennial.
You're not. You're Gen X. You will go down that ship with me. But no, it's there is a lot of positive change. And I think where we sat 8 years ago, we didn't have that outlook. It was scary. It was scary. The data was scary. The science was scary. That's what started this podcast. It wasn't out of fear, but it was out of, okay, Angie and I had a clear picture of what's going on around the planet. We wanted to do something about it. So anyways, yeah, it's, I think, where I used to think polar bears might go extinct, I think they're going to eke out survival. They're going to suffer a little bit, but
they're fighting. They're fighting.
I don't think they're going to go extinct. I don't. But
let's hope. I hope not. I mean, that's the thing is, like I said, I talked about the Hudson Bay ice buggy, polar bear tours. Our kids should be able to do that. Our grandkids, our great grandkids. I mean, they're just the coolest species, and we still have more to learn about them. And they're super intelligent, and their physiology is incredible. And we're going to get to all of that here shortly.
All right, welcome back after the break. And today, instead of doing evolution, because we've done bears quite a bit and polar bears, special guest today, John, Angie's husband. Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going? Good.
Good to have you back on the podcast. And Angie said you have a lot of insight managing polar bears under human care. So we want to talk about that today because one of the things I said, a future for them, I don't think they'll completely go extinct because I think we would maintain a captive population if anything else if they went extinct in the wild. But when I say managing polar bears under human care, what does that invoke in you? And I guess explain, where you did manage them, how long,
Hmm.
but when we talked about panda bears, my favorite
Yeah.
episode,
Yep.
managing
Mine
your
too.
your panda bears. Yeah. How does it differ with a polar bear? Panda bears versus polar
Not
bears,
even
but
not even close, right? So I think
yeah.
when you talk polar bears, I worked with them for a few years at Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, and managing them it's really interesting. They're an incredible animal. They're incredibly smart, strong, powerful. They just are the total package. I mean, a lot of times when people think about animals like that, they think about elephants, strong and smart, but polar bears are absolutely right up there. And so, yeah, they're to manage them, it takes a lot of skill in order to manage them, honestly, because you have to deal with, again, this animal that is just so powerful. So you have to make sure that you can keep them where they need to be. Um, they the interesting thing is, again, they're seasonal diets, so they eat seasonally. So um, they eat a ton of food when they're in the high season. Um, we did a bunch of processed stuff, so we did a specialized diet that was processed, so it was easier to feed out to them. But we did do fish, and we do seafood, and you do some meat products. But then during the low season, when they just start going into, they slow down, they don't really, it's not an actual true hibernation. Um, but it's more challenging to work with them because they're slower, they're lazier, they're not food motivated. So there's a lot of different things you got to think about when you're working with them. But the biggest thing, the most important thing is that they are um, so active and so brilliant that keeping them busy and occupied is a challenge. It takes a lot to determine ways to keep them occupied, and then devices to use for them so that they don't just rip them up and destroy them. So it's yeah, it's a it's way different than any other animal. Bears in general are, but the polar bears are even kind of their own sort of level, their own class on that.
One thing, just a bunch of questions on that.
Hmm.
Uh, One is meeting their caloric needs during that winter period when they're also, how do you keep them cooler in the
Mm.
summer? Because I think in San Diego Zoo, that's the last polar bear I saw
Hmm.
under human care, and that exhibit design. Um, how do you make sure they don't get too hot, too
Hmm.
stressed
Hmm.
during the hot periods of months? Because Chicago gets pretty muggy, right? Like it's pretty
Yeah,
nasty in
yeah,
summers.
it
Yeah,
can get hot.
yeah,
It's not as
yeah.
consistent, so the good thing is it comes and goes, but it can be pretty hot. But I think we do get away a little bit easier there because it's not as hot for as long. The pool is chilled, so the pool water is cold, so that's where they get a lot of their relief. Other than that, um, yeah, the rock work can get pretty hot, so we would give a lot of ice products. So either ice cubes, big frozen ice blocks. You can freeze, the sort of like large, thick toys with water in it that you freeze, so the water inside freezes and keeps cool. So there's a lot of different things like that. But you want to have different substrates for them as well, right? So they'll cool off just by laying in the grass or potentially in um, dirt or something like that. So lots of different substrates, shade shelters. So rock overhangs are great. Some of the tarp shade shelters are great. So different things like that. And then a lot of times now, what we're doing is we're giving them choice, right? So they may have access to go inside where it's cooler and stay there. Now, again, if you want them on view for the public, which most people do, you'll create a lot of opportunities outside to keep cool. We didn't have one when we were there, but I know some places are doing actual chilled rocks, right? So it's a rock that's got coils under it to keep it cooler. So that's how you encourage them to be outside, and it keeps them cooler. So it works out pretty
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And then how did you make sure because we said about 12,000 calories a day for an adult
Hmm.
polar bear. How do they reach that, like that fat rich diet? What other things could you add?
So it was a processed diet. So they were on so it was a biscuit. It was one of the main feed companies produces a biscuit, right? And it's designed for polar bears. And so it looks like just like a dog treat sort of, but it has a ton of calories in it. It has a super high fat content, and it smells like fish. I mean, it really does. So you know that, I mean, there's a lot in it. And they ate that really well. Again, when they're really beefing up on calories, like they eat everything. I mean, it's you know, I don't want to say like you can't feed them enough, but like you gotta feed them a ton, and they eat it really well. And that made it easier than dealing with tons of fish, which again, we did give them some fish, but you didn't have to give them, say, exclusively fish. Unlike the seals, for instance, we did feed the seals exclusively fish. They didn't have a biscuit or processed or anything like that. But again, obviously smaller volume, the animals are smaller, so they'd have to deal with as much, but it's a lot of work to feed out fish at that volume.
Now, you mentioned intelligence. Do you have any stories of where like you were like, wow, you wouldn't expect a polar bear to do that?
I mean, honestly, a lot of it came from just the way they would look at you. You know, so when you're interacting with animals and you're having interactions, a lot of the animals certainly obviously will look at you, but the way the polar bears looked, it just felt like they were absolutely analyzing everything going on. So it's really hard to explain, but just the way that they looked. So a lot of times when you're working with animals, they aren't making a lot of contact with you. Like especially primates don't make eye contact with you because it's a threat. And the cats sometimes will and sometimes won't. Kind of depends on the cat. But the polar bears were always just like dead eyeing you every time, and watching everything you did. And so I mean, you know, like I said, we tried to give them things to entertain them or make things different for them, but they would blow through almost everything we did for them instantly. So so we actually weren't. It was hard to judge their intelligence because they were just far beyond anything we could do. Honestly, you know. And as far as training, they trained well. Of course, they're very intelligent, but sometimes it's their laziness that took over to where they weren't, you know, we weren't doing as much with them because they sometimes were just super lazy. And then certainly as they start slowing down, then they wouldn't want to train as much. They weren't as motivated. So, it was they were a really interesting animal to work with. One of the most interesting animals that I worked with. Yeah, they were
So
incredible.
better than panda bears?
Better than panda bears.
Oh, come on. They're just, yeah, I would be pretty excited to work with polar bears. So I guess final question would be like ranking them as a carnivore, because you work quite a bit with quite a few carnivores.
Yeah.
Were they one of your favorites, or do you still go back to some others?
They're just certainly for bears, they're my favorite bear that I worked with. They are right up there with some of the carnivores, although I do think that I still lean a little towards my tigers are fantastic. We had a jaguar that's fantastic. So yeah, it's tough. Best bear and top 5 carnivores.
Carnivore, okay.
I may have to go through and actually rank them. You didn't like I was ready for everything. I wasn't ready for the ranking of my top carnivores. But yeah, it's just and this is the thing about animals and working with animals, or getting an opportunity to go visit animals or go behind the scenes and visit animals, is some of this is so hard to articulate until you've been near them. Of course, they're humongous. They stand up on their back legs and they're just humongous, and they put their paws up, and that you're not prepared for that. And you're just not prepared for that, the look that they can give you, you know? So again, I just encourage, and I don't know how many zoos are doing any sort of polar bear encounters, but if you got an opportunity to get up and close, do it, because it'll change your life. It's incredible. And so again, that's the cool part of what we get to do, and what we get to hopefully share with you all out there, is the animals are amazing. And if you can get up close to them and learn about them and appreciate them, it changes your life, and it changes your outlook, and it changes, what you do for them, basically.
Yeah, and I really hope
hmm
that's not the future of polar bears is under human care, but
hmm
what you're doing is important in understanding them better. So in an emerging situation, like we know with the Javan, Sumatran
hmm
rhinos, other large mammals, what we learned by your profession in zoos, accredited zoos, that's why they're still around, or they would be extinct. We're down to 50 of each of those populations. So thank you
Yep.
for what you do.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing your experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page with that. Like, I completely agree that we do great work. It's great to care for them. It's great to help them. But what we need to do is protect the wild. We need to protect where they live in the wild, do our best to do that as individuals. Make sure you're making that well aware. Any of your government officials, making sure that it's important to you. Again, we have to do our part to protect where they live in the wild.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
then, for the industry I'm in, for the field I'm in, we're a backup. That's what I like to think about it. We're a backup. Now, again, we play a great role in bringing you all in, bringing guests in to see them, and that's what I love to do. But again, as far as the population management, we're backup. But
Yep.
again, we
Yep.
we all do our part, and I appreciate you and Ange for doing your part and getting the word out there, because it's super important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks, Sean. And I look forward to recovering Panda here soon.
Yeah.
And having you
We'll
back on.
revisit and see the current state. So yeah, but always great to
Yeah.
see you. Take care.
Yeah, you too. You too.
Enjoy,
Yeah.
and we'll chat later.
Yeah, we'll chat soon. Take care. All right. Angie's back. And again, evolution. We've covered it in so many bear species. You go back to Gobi bear. I think the highlight for polar bear is they did split off from brown bears, 500,000 years ago. But again, that took, tens of thousands of years. It just didn't happen one day and one went this way, one went that way. It was pressure. The polar bears started hunting seals, getting fatter. The ones that fur could reflect light, which we're going to find out, maybe better hunting strategy. They were able to survive the cold better, eventually evolved into what we have today. So polar bears can't just dial back the clock 500,000 years and go back to being their ancient ancestor. It's a one-way path for them where they are adapting. And they will adapt. I think best case scenario is they will adapt. And we'll just have a smaller population than, say, in the past. And then if, we get a big ice age again, polar bears will thrive. Anyways, that's the quick and dirty on the evolution. Don't need to recover it again. But some other facts that, again, are just always fun to talk about polar bears. Lifespan up to 25 years in the wild, even though that's, a lot of them don't make it. The young ones, they don't make it, but under human care, up to 30 years. Again, just what John was talking about, how they feed them, how they manage them, all the care they get, the veterinary care, living their best lives as they can, without having to struggle to find food or, things that can happen out in the wild. Very fast, 25 miles per hour, 40 kilometers per hour. Again, that's short bursts, but again, they're quick. You watch any of those nature shows. I mean, they, and then they swim 10 kilometers an hour or 6 miles an hour.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's fast enough where they've been compared to an Olympic swimmer's top pace. So that's.
But they'd catch me, no problem.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't
think I would
want
first
to.
die of heart attack. Then they
Yeah.
catch
They
me.
can outswim you. They can outrun you. Yeah, forget about it.
Yeah.
I
But,
might
I
be
mean,
able
yeah,
to
I
beat him
mean-
on a bike.
Yes, that's about it. But and they swim long distances. This isn't short swims. Up to 100
No.
kilometers.
Oh,
Yeah.
I have my slide is titled "Super Swimmers" because they're powerhouse. I mean, they're built to live in these icy seas, and so that's one whole thing to factor. Anybody who's ever done like a cold plunge, or just been in like cold Lake Michigan in June or early July, not fun. And we'll talk about once again their cold adaptations, but they are powerhouse swimmers, and they're the most aquatic, of course, of all bears. They spend much of their lives moving between drifting sea ice and the open ocean, which open ocean alone is enough to make me want to get back on land sometimes, especially from a swimming point of view. I want to do a sprint triathlon, Chris, but I around here in Florida, most of it is open ocean swim, and I'm a strong swimmer, and the sprint triathlon distance isn't very long in swimming, but you never know what you're going to get the morning of in the ocean. So I'm definitely, it's on my bucket list, but I haven't done it yet. And as strong a swimmer I am, that's probably the most intimidating. That and the heat for like
Yeah.
running. Looking at the data with polar bears, the longest recorded continuous polar bear swim is about 426 miles or 687 kilometers over 9 days through these frigid Arctic waters, which is just crazy. Ugh. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. But of course, they have their huge paddle-like front paws, and those act as oars. And their hind legs, when they swim, kind of trail behind like a rudder for steering. And when it comes to swimming, too, the polar bear's body fat is actually quite helpful. Helps provide buoyancy for them. And then, of course, insulation to the cold weather when the water's that cold. So, and also the polar bear fur is pretty water repellent. So that helps with buoyancy as well. And when they are hunting seals, we have to remember that polar bears can dive and they can hold their breath for several minutes at a time when they go underwater to stalk these seals and chase after them. So it's just
Yeah,
incredible.
they're finely tuned, adapted, and you mentioned the hair, and that's the one fact I remember early on that blew me
Yeah.
away was that it's not white, it's transparent and hollow.
Yes.
So you just
yes.
mentioned their coats. So again, quickly, just recap, why they appear white.
Well, you gave it away. Why does it appear white? Because technically, polar bear fur is not white. And so polar bear fur is very insulating. They have this dense coat that's actually 2 layers. The outer layer consists of these long guard hairs that appear white. Once again, that appear word, and they repel water. Where the inner layer of their fur provides insulation to help retain body heat. And with the specialty fur, it looks white, but each of these longer guard hairs is actually translucent, Chris. And so it basically reflects and diffuses sunlight so that they blend into the snow and ice and basically appear white. And white, of course, in color is important for them to camouflage on the ice when they're hunting seals and or in the snow. So it's really see-through, translucent.
I love that fact. And then they're black skin underneath. So
Correct.
That's the nose and yeah.
Yeah, so beneath the layer for polar bears have a layer of black skin that basically helps absorb the sun, and that helps keep them warm in the brutal cold weather. And they also have a black tongue, which once again, researchers aren't sure if that's part of something to help them keep the heat in as well, or it's just a byproduct of being relatives with a brown bear.
Now their blubber layer is like 6 inches, around 11 centimeters thick, so it's pretty thick. I think one of the things I found funny when looking at that, and we talked about the energetics, was this. It's a superpower of theirs because we talk about superpowers with these animals. The fat that they consume off these seals would kill us. We'd have heart attacks. All the plaque buildup in our arteries, it would be catastrophic to us. But for these bears, their metabolism, they're able to not have that build up in their bloodstream, in their heart valves, in their arteries. Instead, they store it as blubber. So that is a superpower. And I would love to figure out that physiological process because, again, when we always go back, what can these animals teach us? We can learn from them. And maybe, we figure out how polar bears metabolize fat so well, we can develop treatment for humans. Again,
And alongside that, polar bears have adapted to cope with limited freshwater intake because remember, we're on sea ice. So frozen sea ice is salt water. So it's salty. And polar bears basically obtain much of their water from the fresh water that they need, from the metabolic breakdown of fat. And of course, polar bears can get some water if they eat fresh snow that's fallen, but they pretty much rely on getting it from fat or during the digestion of prey, which is just another really cool adaptation. But to do that, they also have specialized kidneys that can concentrate their urine so they can conserve water and they don't have to drink a lot, and they can minimize their fluid loss as well. So, yeah. And then to stay warm, of course, polar bears have the fat that Chris was talking about, the insulated fur. They have these large padded feet, which are partially webbed with rough pads on the soles. And this, once again, helps design, it's like just like a snowshoe, and it prevents slipping, helps distribute their weight over snow and ice, and also keeps them, swimming pretty well. And researchers think big feet for the snow and ice to walk on or swim in, but small ears and small tails to reduce heat loss when it's cold out. And so you don't want extra body parts being in the frigid air or in the frigid water.
Mhm.
So small ears, small tail helps conserve heat. And then polar bears also have countercurrent heat exchange. So they have a specialized circulatory system. The system helps prevent heat loss in the polar bears by regulating blood flow. Warm blood flows to the extremities. It's cooled by colder blood returning from the extremities, going back and forth. And this helps them conserve heat on the colder days or when they're swimming. So, yeah, it's physiological adaptations at their finest to be able to deal with the cold weather. That is one of the reasons why I moved from Michigan to Florida, which is
Well, yeah, I used to. 'Cause I used to
Michigan's not
always
that
teach-
cold compared to the Arctic either, right? Oh my
No.
gosh, I can't even imagine.
No, it's freezing. It's always below zero there. But I always talk about countercurrent exchange. The way I always explained it was, you imagine their paws on the snow.
Mm-hmm.
That blood is cooler. It will cool down, naturally. So as that colder blood comes up the arm, the warm blood coming from the body, the countercurrent will warm up that cool blood. So when it returns to the body, it's warm. It's back to normal temperature. So you're not circulating cold blood back into the body, the core, which would make them cold. It's just
Yes.
one of the physiological adaptations in physiology that just always blows me away. Like how cool biology is and how nerdy we can get. And I get excited about something like that, but that's nature. Nature developed that
is.
system
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
warm up the blood where it would cool down
Yeah.
the animal, and they would die. They would freeze to death. So, all right. Want to get to behaviors, but one of the things we talked about in Gobi Bear that blew you away was their sense of smell.
Yes.
Bears,
Yes.
Bears' sense of smell is unparalleled on the planet.
It's a superpower. I mean,
Yeah.
they're super swimmers, but their smell probably takes the cake.
Yeah, they can detect a seal breathing from over a kilometer away. So that's seal breath, fish breath.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah,
that's like
they're
through
really
the
sensitive.
hole in the thick ice and snow. Like even if the seal's hidden from view. So it's incredible. And then I was reading that in good conditions with wind, that a polar bear can actually sniff an animal, ideally a seal, up to 20 miles or 32 kilometers in good conditions in the air.
Yeah. Well, I
Which is-
imagine, and I imagine carrion too, that they think it's really pungent. So I imagine they could smell like a whale carcass or something like that from quite far away
Yeah,
and
it's
hone
just
in on it. Yeah.
yeah, it's a super sense. It is central to how they live and hunt in the Arctic, and it helps them travel over long distance, right? We talked about hundreds of miles of migrating north and south, depending on the season. And then, of course, they use their keen sense of smell to locate potential mates, which we'll talk about, which is especially important if their numbers are declining and there's less of them. They're harder to come to find each other. And of course, the smells is important for finding food sources, and it's just incredible. And the nasal passage of the polar bear is lined with these large olfactory receptors or tissues that is connected to the brain. And the polar bear has a very highly developed olfactory bulb that is in the brain. And this is in a region that's really dedicated to being able to use their super sniffer for miles and miles away. And so one article I was reading talks about wind direction is really critical for the hunting polar bear. They'll often turn their nose up, held high, and kind of go in a zigzag position to help basically triangulate where exactly the smell is coming from. So I mean, I didn't see any specific data saying that they're better than certain dogs, but their super smell can definitely rival that, if not exceed, dogs and other bear species. So they're definitely a top smeller in the animal kingdom. So largest land carnivore, one of the top smellers in the animal kingdom. It's just incredible.
Well, I think if I remember right, the bears,
Mhm.
they can smell greater distance, but I think we're finding dogs, they're more fine-tuned.
Like acute,
I
yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention her earlier, Dr. Erin Curry, because that was one of the first interviews we did. We did polar bears. She was one of my good friends from when I was a professor at Clemson, and she went on to get her doctorate and worked at Cincinnati Zoo, and she was training one of their hounds to detect pheromones in polar bear manure for pregnancy checking. So she made national news, and then she went up to the Arctic to see polar bears in those buggies, and so we had that interview many years ago, and she's still doing wonderful work and research in polar bears. So yeah, the bloodhounds, like at the airports, you come here in New Zealand or Australia, you'll have dog sniffers looking for contraband and things like that, for biosecurity. So they're more fine tuned, but bears have a stronger sense of smell over distance. So some differences. Now, we talked about ring seals being, that's it. That's their bread and butter. That is what they need to survive on. That is where they're getting all that fat, blubber. That's what sustains them year in, year out. Bearded seals, they will hunt too, and does have good blubber, but they're just not as many as, say, ringed seals. So that's their big one. Now, ringed seals, thankfully, least concern right now.
Okay.
Uh, Stable, maybe declining populations, we don't know, but there's millions of them. I mean, they're very, very abundant there in the Arctic. Bearded seals, not as widespread as ringed seals, but least concern as well. So at least their prey are doing okay. Now, we've talked a lot about, what they occasionally might eat, but also they do eat carrion, so whale carcasses. They will try to catch walrus if they can, younger ones, but that's very opportunistic. It's really the ring seal. That's it. That's what they need to survive. So with all that, we've covered quite a bit. But any other behaviors, and then their reproductive strategies? How are they
Yeah, well,
doing?
you know me, I love carnivores. I didn't get to work with them at the zoo like my husband. I'm more of the prey specialist.
Hoofstock, yeah.
Hoofstock, yeah. So I'm always so fascinated whenever we cover a large carnivore, or any carnivore, and really how they hunt. And so when it comes to hunting, polar bears typically have two strategies. They have the still hunting, which is predominantly used, and this involves basically finding a seal's breathing hole, probably through their super sensing smell, and the ice, and then they basically just wait for the seal to surface to get the air and then kill them. And the other technique is stalking, and this technique is more of a crouching, kind of staying out of sight while creeping up on the seal. And in the stalking category, they can swim through water, through any cracks in the ice or channels until it's close enough to snatch the seal. But this is, once again, not utilized as much because it's energetically costly as well. And then if the bear leaves the breathing hole, it may not be as good as getting back to where it needs to be to get the breathing hole to get out. So, those are the two main strategies of hunting seals. And then when it comes to them hunting other food like the caribou, that was just caught on video, and that was incredible. Moving in the water, chasing one. Whether they pick out the weaker ones or the older ones or the younger ones, I'm not sure. So, like I said, hopefully the scientists will continue studying how they're hunting or scavenging or foraging. They will eat a little vegetation as well when they're stuck on land. So, and then when it comes to polar bear behavior, once again, I just want to briefly touch on this walking hibernation. So it's not a traditional hibernation where the bear is completely just sleeping the entire time. The polar bear will typically undergo more of this walking dormancy or walking hibernation, where they have reduced activity, reduced metabolic rate, and reduced food, usually because of food scarcity or fasting. And so this helps them conserve body fat and maintain their body temperature. It helps them reduce muscle mass loss. And it's typically triggered by the food scarcity. So it will often happen in the summer or later in the fall before they move back out onto the ice. And unlike a traditional hibernation, the polar bear's walking hibernation they're easily woken up. So it's not a deep sleep. They can basically all of a sudden they say okay, here's food. Let's go get the food. So they can respond rapidly to changing environmental cues. So once again, that may help them with all the hardships that they have as far as climate change and food scarcity and things like that. So like Chris said, it'll be interesting to see how they adapt in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But hopefully some of them are fighters and will be able to figure it out. And when they're not eating or hunting or doing this walking hibernation, polar bears spend about 2/3 of their time inactive, and the rest is just walking or swimming or stalking or feeding. Those are their main activities because they just have to look for food, especially as the ice gets scarce and they have to work harder and harder for food. But they do like to keep their fur clean, and so they'll spend some time grooming. And a polar bear is a lot like us. They typically sleep about 7 to 8 hours per day, plus naps. So that's different than me. I'm not a napper. Whenever I nap, I feel much worse after waking up. So, but I'm a solid 7 to 8 hours a night. And then in the wintertime, polar bears are known to dig shallow snow pits and rest with their backs to the wind, sometimes sleeping through blizzards, right? We didn't even really talk about blizzards. And then basically the snow will pile them around, acting like a nice little Arctic insulated blanket, which does not sound fun to me, but they love it. And that's how they can hang out for several days if there's a big storm until it passes. And when we talk about body language, Chris mentioned that they can have a postural stance where they can stand tall on their hind legs to show dominance. But otherwise, probably the more fun behaviors to watch with cubs playing, rolling around, wrestling. We've all seen the wonderful videos of them and the cubs in the snow just running around and rumbling, tumbling, and basically learning to develop some of these hunting skills and also strengthen social bonds. We don't have time to get into all polar bear communication because they do have body language, they have vocalizations. As a super smeller, they use a lot of scent markings in their urines to communicate a message. I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I'm in estrus, this is my territory, all of these things. And I'm not sure if John covered it, but polar bears do make vocalizations. They can make a chuffing noise, a scolding noise to their cubs. Boy, do I know that one. It's like this low growl. I do that to my kids once in a while. They can hiss, snort, loud roars or growls, deep growls, which often is warning or defense for food. And then once again, when we look at non-vocal cues, they have ritualized wrestling. They have head wagging from side to side, and that's usually a sign that the polar bears want to play. And adult bears will initiate play, so that's super cute. They have a nose-to-nose greeting, which we've all seen on either a coffee cup or a holiday card with the two polar bears touching nose-to-nose. And they will rush each other. They'll charge. So, yeah, they definitely have some territorial body language when they meet each other when it's non-breeding season to let each other know which one's dominant, which one's submissive.
So a lot of times solitary, right? And it always get to the reproduction. They can smell really well, but again, we're only talking 21,000 roughly animals over massive distances.
Well, exactly. So polar bears are solitary, but then when there's less of them over these huge ranges, they're even more solitary, right? And so it's typically will just be a mom caring for her cubs that you'll see together. And then, of course, a male and a female during breeding. But that's it. Other than that, they don't really want to bump into each other if it's not the breeding season, especially two males. And their polar bears do need to find each other, of course, during breeding season. And that is typically either late winter or early spring from March to June is when mating occurs. But when male and female polar bear do find each other and come together, the male will typically court the female by following her scent trail. And he may follow her for miles. And of course, she's leaving all these chemical cues to basically signify if she's in estrus and ready to breed. When he finds her, he'll often herd her into a quiet area. That can either be ice or bay or sometimes small islands. And what that does is that'll reduce other competition from other males because he may not be the only male that's picking up on the scents that she's putting down. Now, the courting polar bear couples will typically stay together for about a week or more, and they walk and they rest and they hang out, and they basically are interacting instead of hunting and feeding. And as they spend this time together and trust builds, you'll see them mirroring each other's movements, and that's where you see the cute Christmas card or holiday coffee mug where they do the gentle nose-to-nose touching or nuzzling each other around the chest or the neck. And basically, once a female fully accepts a male, the mating will happen over several days. And then there's kind of a mellow period where the pair will lie and rest and just kind of be inactive and hang out together. Once the mating season ends, the bond is over. That's it. The male and female simply just walk off in different directions, unlike a Christmas Hallmark movie, right?
Yes.
So, and the male basically is like off to find another female, and the female is off to keep away from any other males. So, very interesting. When we look at the gestation length of polar bears, they do experience, the females, what's known as delayed implantation or embryonic diapause. And we've covered this on the podcast before, but just briefly, the female polar bear is bred around, and her eggs are fertilized around mid-May. And they're developing 1 cell, 2 cell, 4 cell, 8 cell, 16 cell, 32, on and on. And at some point, the embryos basically freeze. They're in like this frozen animation state. Not cold freeze, but suspended animation. Just all metabolic processes in the cell stop, in the little embryo cell stop. No more multiplying, getting more cells, getting bigger, none of that. And they just hang out. And the embryos, anywhere from 1 to 3 typically, just do not attach to her uterus. They just literally hang out in her uterine or in her uterus, like near the uterine wall, until late August or September. So there's several months there where they're just in suspended animation because researchers are still learning about what the cellular markers are or proteins to basically stop the embryo from growing for a couple months while it bounces around the uterus, and then signal for it to, okay, now develop into a cute little fuzzy polar bear. Mind-blowing. Once again, just wow. So this is such an amazing process, and researchers believe that over time, the reproductive embryonic diapause to basically allow the female to acquire more nutrients and store the fat she needs to support the growth of the embryo in her body, and then, of course, to take care of it or them once they're born. So it's just really, really incredible. And therefore, when we look at the gestation period of of a polar bear, it can extend anywhere from 195 to 295 days. So
hmm
it just basically depends on her nutritional status, which is just incredible. And so basically, when cubs are born, they'll be born in the mother's den sometime between November and January. And litter sizes can range from 1 to 4 cubs, with 2 on average is usually what are born. And the cubs are born highly attritial, and they spend their first 3 to 4 months in the den. And during the first 10 days, they're basically next to their mom, cradled on their mom's body for 60% of the time. She's keeping them warm, protected, and of course, giving them constant access to her milk. They hang out. And besides being a super swimmer and a super smeller, I'm here to say the polar bear mom is a super mom as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so she's doing all this. She's not reminded, she's not eating. She's just there keeping them warm, keeping them alive, living off of her blubber, getting her water from her blubber, which is incredible. And she'll just spend the time in her den, resting with the cubs, nursing them, licking them, adjusting their positions, keeping them comfortable, keeping them warm, just being a good mama. And once the cubs emerge from the den, once again, this is about after 3 to 4 months, then the mom is devoting most of her time to teaching them basically how to hunt. And so she'll leave the den with the cubs, and they'll have frequent stops to nurse. And sometimes she has to carry her cubs through the snow once they emerge from the den. And then these cubs, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, sometimes 1, are dependent on their polar bear mom for up to 2.5 years. And during this time, mind you, the female has to, waste some energy telling other males, nope, don't breed me. That's not where I'm at right now. And it's just a super energetic cost and a long duration for parental investment. And the mom, of course, has to teach the cubs how to hunt. And she does this basically by letting the cubs follow her closely to these seal holes and their kill sites and watch, and then gradually let them learn to hunt by themselves with a horrible success rate at first. And then over time, as the cubs get older, they get a better success rate at hunting seals. And it's just, polar bears are super moms. They have extended maternal care, a multi-year protection, provisioning, teaching, which helps their cubs survive to become juveniles and then hopefully adults and become reproductively successful themselves. But it's a big commitment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
when
it's
you look
challenging. I mean, that's right now. It's really challenging for them.
exactly. When you look at generation intervals, they're not able to produce every year because of that. So their numbers, regardless, even if everything was perfect and climate change just stopped and it was great, it would still take a while for their numbers to even increase that much because of all this maternal care and investment and her breeding every couple years. Only hoping that 1 or 2 of these juveniles survive into
Make it.
adulthood. Mhm.
Yeah, we'll make it. And, as the ice retreats farther, more swimming, all of the challenges. But, it's a mixed bag, what we've learned over the 8 years since we first covered polar bears. I think there's a lot of positive that where we were 8 years ago, it looked dire. It really looked dire with climate change and everything going on. But now change is coming. It's a little too slow for my like, but enough. And, there's a lot of people out there fighting for polar bears. I mean, World Wildlife Foundation, Polar Bear International, Cincinnati Zoo, and Botanical Gardens. I was talking about Dr. Erin Curry, the work she's doing, learning on the bears that under their care, but then going to the Arctic and going to where they live and studying them there too. So a lot of great things happening, Angie. As we mature in this podcast and we revisit some of the species again, it does make me feel more hopeful, I guess, than where we were 8 years ago when I said, hey, do you want to do a podcast together? Because things are really bad. It's really bad. But we lived through COVID, and the science is being listened to around the world, and action is being taken. So, yeah, I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, a lot of people care, of course, about polar bears, of course, about climate change, about the polar caps, and yeah, we just need to make our voices loud, and we need to vote with our dollar. We need to vote green, and we need to vote for those greener policies and those stakeholders, because of course it will benefit our polar bears, but it'll benefit so many animals
Yeah.
that like the polar bear will have some of the toughest time adapting to this hotter climate.
Well, great job today. Going back to an old favorite species. And, we don't know what we'll cover next in the future of our older species we've covered years ago. I know honey badger's on the short list to revisit because that was such an early episode.
Yeah, somebody
But
just asked me, they're like,
yeah.
what is your favorite species ever covered? And I'm like, wow, that's a great question. I like some of the obscure ones that you and I have to learn so much for, like the mantis shrimp,
Yeah.
or even the cockroach, just because they're just so different from what you and I have studied in the past and our special areas of specialties. But yeah, of course, I had to tell him. I was like, if you're only going to listen to one, listen to honey badger. Honey badger don't
Honey
care.
badger. We got to redo it. We got to redo honey badger.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm looking forward to 2026.
Me too.
Again,
We're not
check
going
us out on
anywhere,
YouTube
baby.
if you haven't. Yeah, if you haven't checked us out on YouTube, check us out there. Please subscribe,
Mm-hmm.
and rate the show, and check out our YouTube shorts too. Those are on there every week. But yeah, we'll see you at the other end of 2025 and starting 2026. Year of the
Awesome.
horse. It's a big year for us.
Yes, it is a big year. Thank you, everyone, for listening, caring, and sharing this episode. We really appreciate you.
Take care.